Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on understanding neurodiversity in recruitment. We will be starting in just a couple of minutes, so stay tuned. All right, so we've hit about 11:01, so I might get started now. Hi everyone, I'm Josie Miller, Assessment Lead at Testgrid, and this is Aron Mercer from Xceptional. So it's a real treat to have him joining us today. He is our expert on neurodiversity. So we'll just give a couple of introductions and then we'll get started. So I'm Josie. I look after our assessments at Testgrid. So Testgrid's a provider of psychometric assessments, and we have a range of different assessments on our platform. So I'm really enthusiastic to be talking about neurodiversity today because it's something that as an organisation that really values diversity and inclusion, it's something that we really want to strive for. And so this is a really exciting collaboration for us. So I've got a psychology background. I've worked a little bit with children with autism in the past, but when it comes to neurodiversity in recruitment, Aron has a lot more knowledge than I do. So welcome, Aron.
Oh, look, thanks for the opportunity, and look, I've really enjoyed speaking with you and the team. There's a real passion you've got around inclusion and around enabling employers to get the best opportunities in terms of talent. So I'm Aron. I'm part of the founding team at Xceptional. Xceptional helps employers assess, place and support neurodivergent people in open employment, and we train employers on inclusion, and we've been doing that since late 2017.
Thank you. All right, so we'll get started with our webinar now. So just quickly before we start, I wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. So I just wanted to recognise the traditional owners on the land that we are meeting on today. Recognising that these are Indigenous people's lands. I am personally on the land of the Kaurna people, but everyone is spread across. So just acknowledging that this always was and always will be Indigenous land, and acknowledging their elders past, present and future. So our agenda for today's webinar, we're planning to go for about half an hour and then have some time for questions at the end. So we'll start off with a little bit of info about Testgrid and Xceptional and how we plan to work together. We'll have some Q&A. So I will be quizzing Aron's brain for all of his knowledge about neurodiversity and how you can use that in the recruitment process, and also the key challenges and roles that neurodiverse individuals will be, neurodivergent individuals would be suited to. And then towards the end, we'll be talking about a pilot offer that we're offering to Testgrid and Xceptional organisations and anybody else who's interested in hiring more neurodivergent people. So watch this space and we'll get to that at the end. So just a little bit about Testgrid. A lot of you probably know some of this already, being some of our clients, but just a little bit of history. We're an HR tech company. We enable smarter and faster business decisions and empower success through people. So we're really passionate about helping people be aligned to the right types of roles and also to enjoy their roles. So we were founded in 1999 where we moved a lot of pen and paper assessments onto a digital platform. And then we've been working in a lot of assessment and HR tech areas and expanded quite a bit. So what our aim is to reduce bias, all the personal biases that we have in recruitment processes, and use objective and standardized measures to be able to assess and recruit and develop individuals. So we've got quite a lot of assessments going out. So in 2020, we had over 1 million assessments conducted. And we really pride ourselves on our customer service as well. So average length of relationships with our customers being 8.2 years. I'll pass on to Aron now to talk a little bit about who Xceptional is.
Yeah, so I touched on, I guess, our core business in terms of assessing, placing and supporting neurodivergent people. We've got a neurodivergent team largely. We have assessed over 1,600 candidates over the last few years, conducted 22,000 assessments, and we've found a way, I guess our expertise, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on neurodiversity, but Xceptional, and I kind of represent our team who've got deep expertise at the intersection of neurodiversity and employment. And we've found a way that works for neurodivergent people in terms of allowing them to demonstrate their skill. We've got a really high satisfaction rate with that process, which is fantastic, and a high retention rate. And the key areas that we're operating in has historically been finance, technology and operations, but that is increasing all the time. And we have some cool logos on our slide there.
Very cool logos indeed. Okay, so now we're just going to get stuck into the Q&A. So to get started, what is neurodiversity, Aron?
Yeah, look, it's a great place to start because language matters and terms do matter. So neurodiversity, Josie, describes individuals who have naturally occurring neurovariations in areas like thinking, attention and memory. And it's an umbrella term, and it's often associated with conditions such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome. The term was actually coined right here in Australia by an autistic woman, Judy Singer, in the late 1990s. And she was one of the first people to see that the medical perspective on focusing on the deficit is not the full picture of a person. And she saw a lot of these conditions have strengths associated with them as well. And that's really her work with built on at Xceptional, focusing on what people can do and what are they great at. Now we encounter language matters because we encounter a lot of well-intentioned people who are often scared to start a conversation about neurodiversity in the work environment, and they're scared to start that because they're unsure of terms. So just a couple of things to touch on. So neurodiversity is the term, is the umbrella term. If I was referring to an individual who identified as neurodivergent, I would say neurodivergent as opposed to neurodiversity. And beyond that, many people would be aware of first person language. So saying a person with autism or a person with vision impairment has been common practice and widely accepted in medical and educational communities as a way of identifying disability for 30 years. At Xceptional, we use identity first language by referring to an individual as autistic or dyslexic. Now, there is debate within the communities around that, but we do that because our own staff and a lot of the candidates, most of the candidates we speak with, prefer to be referred to as autistic. Many will explain that autism is not an add-on, but an intrinsic part of who they are. So for them to hear a person with autism sounds very much like a person with French or a person with gay. It's not an add-on, it's a part of who they are. So through this webinar, as we go through questions, you'll hear me use that identity first language. But as I said, there is still debate on that. And if that, if you identify as neurodivergent and or have family members, you may choose to use another type of language. But for us, that's what we use.
That's really interesting, actually, because I know throughout a lot of my psych training, we were always taught, you need to say a person with autism. But it's so interesting to hear that neurodivergent people actually do see it as a part of their identity. And so it's something to think about moving forward. And I guess it does differ a lot for each individual as well.
Yeah. And look, our approach is the kind of complex technology of ATP. We ask the person, and then respect, as well as things like pronouns in terms of respecting their wishes. As I said, all of our staff who identify as neurodivergent prefer identity first language, and the vast majority of candidates that we work with prefer that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So we've got our next question here, which is, why are employers actively hiring neurodivergent people right now? So what can employers get out of this?
Yeah, so I think, look, if this was a 30-second webinar, I would say they're hiring neurodivergent people because they need to and because COVID's made it easier. But I'll go into a bit more detail. So, as a starting point, neurodiversity is more common than most people think. So it's estimated around 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent. And in speaking with employers that we know, many people don't disclose their condition. There's some research from here and in the UK that estimated around 2/3 of people don't disclose. So when we talk about actively hiring neurodivergent people, we're talking about intentionally and knowingly hiring. And this really, really with the prevalence of neurodiversity, the employers on this call have already hired people who are dyslexic or autistic, without a doubt. Our focus at Xceptional is helping employers find neurodivergent people that they would otherwise overlook and supporting those you've already hired. So the big why question now is, everyone on this call would be aware of talent shortages. So recent survey from KPMG of business leaders, 70% of them cited acquiring and keeping talent is their #1 concern. And some estimates 3 to 5 years around when the current shortage of talent is going to subside. The skill shortages are pushing up wages. I'm not sure if anyone read the AFR article last week that I certainly paid attention to that. Software developers in some sectors have had a salary increase of 45% in 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. We're in the wrong game, Josie, maybe.
Yeah, I know. What am I doing?
And we speak to employers around the country and indeed in the region, markets like Singapore and Hong Kong and India, where they can't find software engineers, QA, project managers, designers, a whole range of skills. And so at the same time, we know neurodivergent people, autistic people in particular, face significant barriers to finding and keeping a job. The official unemployment rates kind of hovers around 35%. According to the United Nations, if you add in underemployment, it's around 80%. So you've got a group of people that are being routinely overlooked at a time where you've got significant shortages of talent. With COVID, the changes that employers have adopted have led to an amazing and kind of only once in our generation opportunity to rethink how we're working. Many of us are dialing in from home today. And so we actually kind of were adapting this before COVID hit. And that's largely because when we surveyed our autistic candidates in 2019, we found that 92% of them wanted to work from home at least part of the time. They wanted to be able to control their environment. So the changes that employers have been able to make with how they've remotely assessed, remotely onboarded, remotely supported, we've had to make those changes as well. But it's never been easier in terms of those adaptations to hire neurodivergent people. And look, our view, this might sound like a grandiose statement, but we think in a tight labour market that neurodiversity should be a part of any organisation's talent strategy, and it represents really the last great pool in terms of untapped talent, which is part of the reason why we're excited to be sharing with your employment partners and talking with you about adopting the methods that we've built. So there's a long answer. So yeah, the short version is they need to, and COVID's made it easier.
Yeah, a long answer, but really valuable stuff there. I think what really stood out to me is that, this is talent that we're missing out on, and it's never been easier to actually hire these people because they've got all of these alterations that we're finally able to make. If they want to work from home, we can work from home. This is the time. So it's really, it would almost be silly not to act on it at the moment.
Yeah, totally. And also the point that organisations have already employed them, and maybe unknowingly. Maybe because we talk about things like psychological safety, maybe people aren't happy to disclose a condition. Maybe they don't think it's relevant, but your employment partners, the people on this call, have already employed neurodivergent people, whether they know it or not.
And sometimes they can be far more productive and creative than anyone else.
Yeah, definitely.
Alrighty, so next up, the next quiz question. Why is the traditional recruitment process challenging for neurodivergent people?
Yeah, and look, I'll be able to touch on I'm really covering off a broad broad view here. There's a number of research papers and things that we've got access to, and if the people on the webinar would like additional information, I'm more than happy to share that. But we can only cover so much in a period of time. But if there are additional things you'd like to know, more than happy to make that available. So to the question, so neurodivergent candidates, they're routinely overlooked for a number of reasons. So I've talked about the kind of untapped talent pool, and Josie, you talked about skills. So often neurodivergent people can have skills in areas like attention to detail and logic and problem solving, the ability to concentrate for significant periods of time, and that can make them incredibly valuable. But they're often overlooked for reasons like reasons that might be trivial, like lack of eye contact or being caught off guard by an unexpected phone screen, not having the right keywords in their cover letter and CV, and not making it into the shortlist. So the untrue assumptions is really what my kind of area of passion is, and what we bump up against every day in speaking with employers. So one of our values at Xceptional, so from day one, Xceptional's built a neurodiverse first kind of culture. We've built a team, myself included, so I have ADHD. And interestingly, we're talking about disclosure. I've never mentioned in a professional context in my life before working for Xceptional that I was neurodivergent. But suddenly we were having these conversations with employers and talked about part of your identity, and it is part of my identity. Our tech team are largely autistic. So we've built this diverse kind of team. But despite that, we still catch ourselves making assumptions based on a label. For example, one of the most common misconceptions is autistic people are fantastic in individual contributor roles, but they struggle with customers and leadership. Not true. Another is ADHD is like me, are full of energy and ideas, but they can't manage projects because they lack attention to detail. Also not true.
Not true. Can confirm.
Yeah. So employers that we speak with can make these same assumptions. So look, you heard it first in this webinar, and I'm glad it's being recorded, but breaking news, not all autistic people want to work in tech. Just make sure you write that down. Not everyone wants to work in tech. To put some numbers around that, In the US, EY, the consulting firm, have a neurodiverse centre of excellence that they've now expanded into multiple countries. And by their estimation, 35% of autistic adults have the attitude and desire to work in technology. From our experience over the last 5 years at Xceptional, that figure's less than 20%, but regardless, it's not the majority. So not all autistic people want to go and be developers. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions that we come up against. At the same time, many do have amazing skills in that sector, and there are a number of jobs that are vacant every day because people can't fill them. So it's a little bit chicken and egg. But autistic people can be hugely creative and visually orientated, which makes them fantastic designers and architects, and a whole range of skills that and areas that we don't often get asked about. And another misconception that is frustrating and also a little bit disrespectful, if you think about it, is that neurodivergent people are going to require significant support once employed. This is partly because neurodivergent conditions like ADHD are invisible. So what are the wheelchair ramps for invisible disabilities? And against this kind of backdrop, many employers imagine extreme scenarios. It might surprise those on the webinar that a study in Curtin University 2016 found that you could onboard autistic adults benefiting the employers, the employees, the organisation without incurring any additional costs. But quite often the reverse is true in the minds of hiring managers and of talent leads. One of the biggest frustrations that I've got in speaking with employers, I'm kind of airing frustrations here, but...
Yeah, is this a venting session, Aron?
It's not meant to be. But look, there's tremendous opportunity. But employers often think they need to wait for perfect. And we've made this mistake as well. They need to wait for perfect conditions before hiring people that present differently. And the underlying assumption is that the rapid pace of change is not going to suit people who may prefer stability, routine, and appreciate written instructions. Actually, prior to this webinar, I was on the phone to a very well-known tech company based in Melbourne who have recently moved office. And when I first started speaking to them in 2019, they were moving office and building a behemoth kind of purpose-built structure. And the thinking was that they didn't want to bring people into an office environment with that much kind of change, and they were literally moving across the road. In 2022, with remote work and in the changes with COVID, that seems absurd. But once again, the assumptions being that people who identify as neurodivergent are going to struggle with change. Our organisation has grown rapidly and changed a lot. Outside us, some of our Australia's fastest growing tech companies are among our customers. I hope they don't mind me mentioning them, but fantastic organisations like WiseTech Global and Deputy, they've got glowing global scale, complexity, a lot of change, rapid growth in numbers of people, but they've proven themselves really adaptable of neurodivergent people in terms of employing them. So yeah, I think that there's untrue assumptions everywhere, and I think that the main message is ask the person, but don't assume based on what you've seen in the media or a family experience that all people are the same who are neurodivergent. Often within the autistic community, the saying goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So ask them and think beyond the kind of stereotypes.
Yes, that's so true. There's just so many different ways it can present neurodiversity. So it is just, I love that acronym, ATP, ask the person.
Yeah, it works well. Although often not used.
Yeah, no, often not used. There's just so many assumptions we can make. So, and that's so true about all types of bias in recruitment, which we heavily talk about at Testgrid. So yeah, it's definitely another one of those. Alrighty, so what talking about all of this, we know the need, we know what companies are going to get out of it. What practical changes can we actually make to attract neurodivergent candidates?
Yeah, and I think in kind of thinking about that, Josie, you and I have spoken before around the traditional recruitment process and how parts of it can be particularly challenging for neurodivergent people. And looking at it logically, it's really, if you take autistic people as an example, there's no logical way to explain the fact you've got 80% underemployment or unemployment, where people who've got average to high intelligence and often amazing skills in high needs. So the system hasn't been working. And so if we think about, say, different processes, different stages. So we have looked at 4 phases: consider, apply, interview, and retain. And at each of those phases, there are barriers. So before an application, before someone even puts an application forward, the reality is that people are thinking about your company or engaging with your company, your brand, before they submit an application. Perhaps they're a customer of yours, or perhaps they're just doing desktop research. And many neurodivergent people that we talk to count themselves out at this phase, and they never get to submit an application. Perhaps they've struggled to find a job for a long period of time. They might have sent hundreds of applications, and their poor experience of often not hearing back has meant that they've actually stepped back. They're not active in the labour market, which means they're not caught or captured in the unemployment stats. There's things that employers can do. There's a cliche, but you can't be what you can't see. So if employers aren't actually actively saying that they welcome neurodivergent people, if neurodivergent people can't see themselves represented on your company's website and in your annual report and in marketing, Dylan Alcott talked about this in terms of his growing up in his Australian of the Year speech. When he was growing up, the only representation of people with physical disabilities was negative in the media. And that really is the same when we're talking about consideration for employment. And really for those that muster up the courage to apply, the application phase largely revolves around the job ad. And these can be wish lists, laundry lists sometimes of skills. Often they're cut and paste. I've done that as a hiring manager before. The record that we've seen at Xceptional is 12 pages. Josie, would you believe? For a job description. And like other minority groups, many neurodivergent people count themselves out if they don't meet 100% of the criteria. So really, I guess the encouragement is think carefully about the essential skills that you've got on there. We worked, to give you a practical example, we worked with an employer in business intelligence, and the job description asked for skills in Power BI. And really what we spend time doing is kind of pushing back sometimes and getting an understanding of what adjacent skills might be useful. And it came out that a power user in Excel could be trained in Power BI over the course of 1 or 2 weeks. And in fact, the employer was more than willing to train people that actually had the other skills and potential. And that kind of flexibility really opened up that job description to a much bigger pool of people. Whereas before, they'll need a neurodivergent person might see Power BI and not know it and not apply. And you're really limiting yourself at that point. Interviews I'll take a step back. In 2018 and 19, we ran a series of assessment workshops, some for external employers, some ourselves, in Sydney and Melbourne. And in most cases, and we had people come in when we all used to meet in an office for 3 days and perform a series of puzzles and activities and basically an opportunity for employers and candidates to meet. In most cases, the candidates that came in had never sat in front of an employer.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're talking kind of 50, 60 people over the course of a number of workshops in 2 different cities. Most of them had never had an interview. And because of the reasons I've just covered, they're counting themselves out, they're getting screened because they don't have the right keywords. But for the lucky ones that get in front of an interview, it can be incredibly stressful. And I've had it described that they place such emphasis on it because it's like their grand final day. They've never made it this far. And so they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And interviews can be stressful for most people. And we recently, at Xceptional, we recently interviewed a number of neurodivergent professionals around their views on interviews. So rather than my words, I want to share what Bryony had to say. Bryony's an autistic individual who we know, incredibly talented, and she had some fantastic feedback on what her perspective is around interviews. And for her, an interview is like a game. But it's a game where autistic people like her don't know the rules and they don't know the objective and they don't know what the interview panel is looking for. Sometimes saying one thing and actually looking for another. It's a game that involves social skills, which Bryony knows her and other autistic people like her can struggle with, such as saying one thing and meaning another, or demanding eye contact. And she had a fantastic kind of line. She said that often she feels that interviewers, and she's a qualified lawyer and gainfully employed, but she often feels that interviewers place more emphasis on how a question is answered in terms of the body language and how it's communicated. And she said a poor answer delivered with confidence may be valued more than a good answer spoken quietly while staring at the ground.
Absolutely.
And all of this contributes to a sense of this is an artificial situation that I don't belong in. And so it's just really valuable to hear those words. So you asked about, I'm conscious about time. Oh no, we're going okay. You asked about practical things. And so we're really conscious. We want to give people practical things they can take away. So just thinking about, so we talked about the job advert, talked about representation and the consideration phase, but there's a couple of key things that we've learned over the last 5 years on the interview that if we've time I'd like to go through.
I think that would be great, and I think a lot of the people on the call would get a lot out of that, I would imagine. So wherever possible, ask neurodivergent people to demonstrate their skills instead of explaining it. So a common workaround is give them a work sample, and then if there is an interview, whether it be over digital technology or face-to-face, use that opportunity to talk about how they answered a particular question in a work sample, if that's appropriate. Give clear logistical advice for applicants, including location, instructions on how to find the building, dress code. So basically don't assume knowledge. Now, when Xceptional got involved in the Remarkable program, which is an amazing accelerator for organisations building services and technology for people with a disability, we moved into the Startup Hub in Wynyard, for those familiar with that building. And we produced a guide on how to get to the office. And the guide was, I think from memory, 12 pages. It was heavy, it was image heavy. So pictures of the bottom of Wynyard Station, platform 3, how to get out. And I thought it was overkill when I got it and saw it. We also experimented for those workshops I mentioned with things like VR for travel planning with our help from our friends at Google. And all of this was designed to reduce stress and travel anxiety and allow people to be their best self when they get there. But the interesting thing happened, Josie, is we had people who weren't neurodivergent who travelled on a train from Newcastle or Wollongong or were from interstate who actually commented on that guide as an example of something that they found particularly helpful, being Sydney's a big city and that particular part of Sydney is very busy and they actually found it really, really helpful. So, adaptations you're making for a group that you're overlooking, they're going to help others. Okay.
Yes.
Which is often how innovation happens. So you look at one group that's being discriminated against or is not navigating the system. You make an adaptation, and others benefit.
I guess you think about a lot of the anxiety and fear that comes with neurodivergent individuals in the recruitment process is probably shared by a lot of other individuals as well. And so making those kinds of adaptations can reduce that anxiety.
Yeah. Most people get anxious to a degree. Like interviews matter. Like if you've gone to an interview because you want the job, even in a seller's market like it is now in talent, you want the job, and it is an artificial situation, as Bryony described, but there are things you can do to reduce that. So giving an advance warning of the topics and questions, and this can be a contentious one because it may seem like an unfair advantage. In all the work that Xceptional does, in the conversations we're having with Testgrid, what we're advocating for is not about lowering the barrier and lowering your standards. The conversations with Testgrid, the opportunity around the pilot really is about widening your pool of people and not going after the same groups of people. So if it may seem like an unfair advantage to give neurodivergent people questions in advance, give everyone the questions in advance. What you're really kind of addressing there is often autistic people in particular can have deficits in verbal processing, which means they can take longer than others to answer a question. That can sometimes be 20 seconds or more, which if you think about it is a long pause. And to Bryony's point around looking at the floor and speaking softly and not making eye contact, if the topic of that, or the purpose of that interview is to exchange information, then there are other ways you can do that and set candidates up for success. Holding the interview environment itself is very important. So with digital technology, it's easier to control the environment, but where you're having people come in person, think about things like a round table rather than a kind of flat table or a square table and having people sitting on one side and the candidate on the other. Do not meet in a cafe, please. It may seem less threatening for you, but it's not. So personally with ADHD, and I actually also have a hearing loss, I find cafe meetings incredibly distracting, hard to hear what's actually going on, and you're just not going to get the best out of that conversation. So if your intent is to actually understand how people think, could you work with them and actually get to know them, don't go to a cafe. If you need a coffee, have one before or after, but don't try and kill two birds with one stone. And then having a small panel is important as well. In the work that we've done with state government departments, often there's a requirement around panel interviews, and in many cases we're reducing the number of people from 3 to 4 down to 2, just not to overwhelm people. And finally, jargon and assumed knowledge can trip neurodivergent people up. We had an autistic candidate that commented that an interviewer was using the phrase consistently in an interview at the end of the day. And this individual thought they literally meant the end of that specific day and was kind of confused. And we kind of laugh and think that's silly, but for people that interpret things literally, we had Josie who we were putting up for a role with a major Australian employer, and they were asked, the role was a data analyst role, and they were asked, how would you compare yourself to the other candidates? And you and I might know that's when you might sell yourself, where you might look for something that others don't have. But this person answered the question literally, and they said, I do not know, I have not met them, which is a good answer for a data analyst. They didn't have the data. But those kind of questions can really can really stump people that interpret things literally.
Yeah, wow. That's huge. Those are some things that, yeah, I hadn't considered. So yeah, thanks, Aaron. I think it's funny when you mentioned try not to kill two birds with one stone in the cafe doing job interviews, because the cafe across the road from Testgrid is actually called Two Birds, One Stone in Melbourne in South Yarra. So maybe that's what people are trying to do there.
Yeah.
But no, really, there's so much extraneous noise in cafes that I can imagine it would be, yeah, not a pleasant environment for a job interview.
Well, I can't hear. And so you can't not hear and do social distancing and concentrate all at the same time. It doesn't work.
No, too much, too many things. Alrighty, so I'm conscious of the time. We've got one last question for you, and then we'll get into talking about the pilot and open it up to our participants. So what has surprised you about building recruitment processes for neurodivergent candidates?
Look, I'm surprised every day by the range of people, amazing people who are looking for a chance and kind of trusting our team in terms of finding a role. So we've got, in the last 6 months alone, we've had lawyers, doctors, engineers, data scientists who are either underemployed or unemployed. The first few years of kind of launching Xceptional, met a man in Sydney who's got a double degree, including law and business, double degree, and he was driving a rail replacement bus in the northwest suburbs of Sydney.
Oh.
And you know, so we hear stories like that kind of constantly. The other thing that surprises me and often surprises the hiring managers, although this is not true in every case, but they're often surprised by how few changes they need to make. I spoke before around the perceptions that, you know, large changes, a lot of support's going to need to be in place, and it's true. Some candidates are going to require a fair bit of support. That's a key part of what we do. But our Chief Technology Officer at Xceptional, who's worked in tech for 20 years, commented in his first 6-8 weeks at Xceptional that working at Xceptional was with an entirely autistic team was no different to working in tech as he had in the last 20 years. I.e., he's been working with people who, whether they know they're autistic or are disclosed, and their ways of working have kind of normalised that. But often employers make the comment, well, is that it? Is that all I need to change? And often it's things like provision of noise cancelling headphones, the ability to work from home, and giving work tasks in a written form. So they're the things that, I mean, look, we get surprises every day, but it's hard to sum up 5 years in 5 minutes. But they're the main kind of areas.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I feel like I've learned a lot today already, so thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pilot program that we are offering now. So essentially, Aaron's shown us now how important it is and how actually easy it can be to hire neurodivergent candidates, and that there really is a need for it at the moment. So what we're doing, so Testgrid obviously offers a range of different assessments already, but the assessments that Xceptional has to offer were designed specifically for neurodivergent candidates, by and for. So essentially, all psychometric assessments are standardized and unbiased, but having questions that are written in a way that is going to be more welcoming to neurodivergent candidates is going to help us to attract them more effectively and help to discover key skills and talents that they have. And so what we're offering here is a discovery session and an explanation of the process to begin with. That's the first phase. And then organisations will have 4-week access for up to 200 candidates to be assessed. They'll receive a candidate profile for each completed assessment. So that's going to detail their results of the assessment. And then you'll also receive training on how to interpret Xceptional assessment data. So this is going to include access to the Xceptional technology and the assessments, and then also access to Xceptional's talent pool as well. So Xceptional work with individuals who are neurodivergent, and so this helps to identify those people so that you can employ them as well. So we're partnering, and I'm really excited about this because it's been a question that's been asked many times at Testgrid, is how can we attract neurodivergent candidates, and how can we make sure our process is fair for them? Because we see there's just, 80% underemployed in the neurodivergent population is just a ridiculous statistic considering how much they have to offer the workforce. So I think this is really important, and we're offering this to 5 of our customers. So feel free to get in touch with us at the end. I'll put our contact details up on the screen, or get in touch with your CSM and have a chat with them about it.
Yeah, thanks, Josie. I'll also put some detail around, I haven't spoken around the platform that we've built, which relies on puzzles and activities, and is based on the premise of allowing a neurodivergent individual the chance to demonstrate skill, rather than having to kind of talk about it, and it gives us benchmarks around skills like attention to detail and problem solving, and the candidate profile is a replacement for a CV. And to our one of our I guess joys is that employers are accepting that as a replacement to a CV, and some really large employers. And so that's the first piece of the puzzle in terms of making things more accessible. Because often the CVs that we see from neurodivergent people, they're not making that through the process. They're getting weeded out because often they're pretty sparse in terms of actual experience. But if you're looking for potential, if you're looking for untapped skills, this is the way to get it.
It's about potential, not experience.
Yeah, and I think often employers talk to us who want to hire people who've done the same job with a different kind of polo shirt on, and maybe you're going to get that working looking at neurodivergent people, but chances are you're not. And so it's looking outside that kind of traditional box where the employers on this call know everyone is going after the same pool at the moment. So.
And you don't want someone else who's just going to add to the rest of everyone else that you have in your organization. You need someone that's different and who's going to bring diverse skills. Or
have to pay them, like tens of thousands of dollars more because you're poaching them software engineers, sort of thing.
Yeah.
We've got a comment that's come through. Did you want me to read that out? I can read it out anonymously.
Yeah, sure.
So sometimes the people who are doing the hiring find out they might also be neurodivergent. This individual has a daughter diagnosed with ADHD, and created aha moments relating to them. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting. We have kind of two groups, but two main kind of areas of candidates. We have people who, like me, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 12. I couldn't sit still. I was kind of hyper focused on certain things, but could hardly read and still can't fill out online forms. Or people like this individual who kind of later in life, through the diagnosis of a child, and we're actually finding it increasingly happening as we work with employers closely, that they're actually finding that it is more prevalent. 1 in 7 is that's a big population, so it is more prevalent. And I think the more people understand about neurodiversity, understand that about themselves, the more inclusive workplaces are going to be. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly a bit of an aha moment.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a question sent through earlier as well. So we're kind of thinking about what kinds of roles you mentioned. It's not only developers.
Yeah.
But what kinds of roles are most suited to people who are neurodivergent?
Yeah. You heard that news flash here first. Not all autistic people want to work in tech. So I would answer it this way. So at the end, we need to help organisations solve talent problems. And so I would start with areas where you have the greatest need. And that might be technology, that might be finance, that might be operations, that could be customer service. And so we started off, Xceptional started off because every small business has to start somewhere, with autistic individuals, and software testing really was the main thing. We've since grown to embrace other areas of neurodiversity, and as employers are increasingly asking us for areas like project management, creative industries, operations, finance I've mentioned. But as well as looking at where you need talent, I would also give consideration to the kinds of hiring managers, and then how you're going to support the hiring managers. I did say that that often it's overestimated, the kind of support, but we still need people with an open mind who are willing to change things a little bit in order to accommodate. So what you're not going to get is, you're not going to get all the fantastic skills and the divergent thinking and people that have done the same job elsewhere and have a university degree and have 7 years experience. Those kind of unicorns don't exist. So we, as well as looking at the kind of roles, we also need to take consideration about the kinds of managers and the environment, which is why we don't work with every kind of employer, but we'd certainly provide that support to whoever we'd worked with. So to start with where you're hurting and where you need people, and then think about the managers that are involved as well.
It definitely needs to be understanding from those different levels in the organisation.
Yeah, so comments just come through. So HR compliance, great point. Project management, research analysts, people that are incredibly detailed and can consume and digest a lot of information. Those can be fantastic areas as well. Looking at skills like areas like ADHD and dyslexia. Yes, like autistic people, they're not all the same, but often they've got skills that mean they can be fantastic in customer service, sales, business development, marketing, entrepreneurship, things like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other?
And autistic folk are really good at reading people in many instances too. Don't underestimate people roles. We are great in this area too.
Great point.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's really, really true. As I've really experienced this many times working with autistic folk as well. So yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I feel like we've definitely touched on a lot of topics today, Aron. So thank you very much for imparting all your knowledge. I think, unless there's any other questions coming through, we might wrap it up. And we've got our contact details up on the screen there for any organisations who'd like to get in contact about the pilot. Please do. That would be excellent. And it'll be great to hear from you, because it's a very exciting project. So.
And look, Josie, thank you. And I think I repeat what I said at the start. Really exciting to be kind of working with you guys. You guys are leaders in this field, and really with over the last 5 years, we've managed to kind of carve out a niche and understanding of that intersection between neurodiversity and employment. But really, for us to drive mainstream kind of change in terms of those employment and underemployment numbers, we need to be working with kind of mainstream suppliers and experts such as yourselves and the employers that you represent. So yeah, from our perspective, this is really exciting. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Aron, and thank you everyone for joining today. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. All righty. Well, catch you down the track then. Bye-bye. Bye.